We're talking about crisis communication. So we have David Campbell with us today. David is the president and COO of Channelf Newman in South Carolina. Hi, David. Thanks for being with us.
Sure. I'm happy to be here.
So maybe for some of our folks that maybe not know you, can you give us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I'm President and Chief Operating Officer of Channelf Newman, and we're a integrated advertising public relations firm. We're headquartered in Columbia, South Carolina. We also have offices in Charlotte, North Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, and Orlando, Florida. We've got roughly 45 employees, and we work with a variety of different industries, anywhere from healthcare to education, agribusiness, and utilities, areas like that. And we've been around almost 50 years.
To open up the conversation a little bit about crisis communication, I hear that term a lot. What does that mean?
You know, crisis communication is a lot different than PR. It often gets lumped with that, and we do both. But crisis is almost when you want to be out of the news, whereas PR is when you're trying to get yourself into the news. But in a crisis communication, you know, a crisis essentially is some unexpected event that comes in and that can have a detrimental effect on your company or your business or your brand. And so, you know, the way you establish yourself is how you react to that. Your company's brand is going to be, and reputation is going to be enhanced or detracted from depending on the way you move through it. People want to see you've been dealt a curveball, and, you know, what are you going to do about it? You know, it could be in the form of something that you do internally. It could be a bad product that goes out there and endangers the lives of people. But in this case, a crisis communication has to do with coronavirus that is not necessarily, you know, connected to a brand. No brand did this, but they still have to deal with what are we going to do about it, and how are we going to make sure that our stakeholders feel that we're doing the right thing out of here.
We say crisis, and the first thing I always think of is it's something huge. It's a crisis. It's real big. But, you know, the way that you're describing on, you know, like how we kind of navigate from a communication from a PR perspective is it doesn't have to be something huge. I mean, it could be, you know, on the smaller side too, but you still have to, you know, follow the same kind of rules. Is that kind of what you're saying there?
Yeah, there are some core components about dealing with any type of crisis. One is you want to respond to it quickly. So the timing of how you react to it is extremely important in there. And then, you know, your communication has got to have some form of brevity to it. You can't be out there trying to explain what's going on, or, you know, why it's not your fault, or you know, what happened there. You've got to take responsibility for it. You've got to take ownership of it. Even if it's technically not your fault, people don't want to hear you explain it away. And then you've got to come up and say, all right, so this is what we're going to do about it. And you got to show some kind of resolution. You know, this is the steps we've taken. This is how we've handled the situation. And this is why you can feel this is why you can feel better about us going forward, because this is not going to be an ongoing problem.
These steps that you're talking about, like how do we form a team to kind of tackle that?
Well, you've got to have the experts in different areas. One, you've got to have on your team, you've got to, I mean, most people think, well, you just get a PR spokesperson and they take care of all your problems. But that's not it at all. You've got to have a technical expert, you know, who understands, you know, the business behind the crisis you're having. Just like, you know, and I'm not playing politics, but, you know, within the White House, you've got to have a medical expert there. Somebody that's credible, somebody that knows what's going on, and somebody that can speak to the specifics of what's happening, so people don't feel like there are a bunch of amateurs up there that don't know what they're talking about. You've got to have someone who can clearly communicate, someone who can go out there and be a good spokesperson, some person that communicate well with the media or with the stakeholders. You've got to have some person of high-level authority in there. Somebody probably in your C-suite on the team. They may not be the face of it, but at least somebody in there that knows that the decisions being made that the company can follow through and carry out. A lot of times you may have somebody from your legal team in there. You know, what are the legal ramifications? How do we handle this? You know, can we legally say what we're about to say? So, you know, there's a whole myriad of people that got to be part of that team to be able to react quickly and come together and formulate not only the plan, but the execution of it.
Now, is that team something that you want to give out to the public, or do you just kind of want to put this message to one person?
I don't know if you need to tell everybody. Know your team of experts includes your 3 lawyers that are trying to make sure that you don't say anything wrong. I mean, but you do want to say, if you're relying on information from experts in there, then I would say on our communications team we've got 4 doctors, 3 scientists, XYZ. If it has to do with something that's of that nature, if it's something that's where the matter expertise isn't as important as, let's just use an airline example. We had an employee who messed up and threw a passenger off the plane wrongly and didn't do a good job. You don't need 15 experts to say that was wrong. So on that, you might have a different situation. But if you're dealing with something medical where you're trying to assure people that this virus is going to be cured, or this is the ways we're looking at it, then having that, knowledge of who the medical experts are on there is probably more important than in another situation.
Yeah, you had an interesting graphic where you had 3 different positions on how you divide up people within a crisis situation. Can you kind of walk us through that a little bit?
Sure. So, whenever a crisis occurs, the public is going to be looking for, they're going to identify 3 different people in that situation. One is somebody did something wrong. So who's the villain? In this situation, in today's world, the coronavirus is the villain. In a situation where there's a, product recall, then the company that made the product is initially called the villain. Then you have who's the victim? Who was hurt by this? And the coronavirus, everybody's hurt by it. Everybody's a victim. This is a common crisis with all of this. In the airline illustration, it's a passenger who gets drugged off the plane. That's the victim. We see videos of it virally of people doing that. And then at the end is who's the vindicator? Who's going to make everything right? Who's the hero that comes out of this? And that's where a company can decide if they can move from villain to vindicator, or if they're going to remain in the role of the villain or not. With the coronavirus, there are going to be lots of vindicators. They're going to be whoever comes out with a vaccine. They're the frontline healthcare workers. They're the people that are out serving food to people out there. They're the religious professionals who are out there taking care of everything. So there are lots of opportunities for people to be the vindicators in this, and to be authentic ones, not ones that are pandering to position themselves that way.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between, crisis communication in terms of externally and then internally, like how to deal with your own folks?
Sure. I mean, the important thing is when you have a crisis, you've got to communicate internally first. You've got to let the people that work there, your employees, know what's going on ahead of time. The worst thing that can happen is for them to find out from the news media or from an outside source of something that's going wrong there. Because immediately you build distrust within the organization. The rumor mill starts flying, and your ability to then communicate accurate information is just going to get discounted because it'll be, well, I heard on the media or I heard from some third party, and you just lose your credibility right then and there. So it's important to make them aware of what's going on and to communicate and then over-communicate. You want to communicate, clarify, and then communicate again. So externally, once you do that, then you go externally. And then you're talking to a different range of audience because your employees are saying, how does this have an effect on us and the company, and how is it going to affect my job? And then externally, people are going to want to know, well, what's going to be my interaction with you in the future on this? So it's a slightly different type of approach that you want to take with both.
How do you manage your employees to kind of keep that message internally? And I'm thinking for like bigger companies, and especially in an environment like this where people are just flooding to social media. I mean, it's got to be really hard to control that.
Well, I mean, you still want to be as transparent as you can. Obviously, your message with your employees. I mean, for example, during this virus, we've had some clients that have been exposed, and so we've had some employees that have been exposed to those clients. So we made a decision early on when someone came to me and said, hey, I may have been exposed. We took measures and means. All right, well, you now have to be quarantined for 14 days, but we're going to let all the employees know that this is going on. so that they're aware of it, because they could come back. Hey, they're going to find out about it anyway. I mean, somebody's going to spill the beans. It's going to get through there. So if they hear it from me first, then they know that we're being upfront and authentic with that. Now, it's not something I'm going to put on a press release and saying, hey, we may have had someone who may have been exposed to somebody down the line, because that's just going to draw unnecessary attention to something that may or may not be an issue. We want to be upfront with employees with it, but then also we ask them to respect the privacy of the other folks in there. And it's not a public message yet until we can confirm, that that's an issue. And if so, then we'll make sure that we take the appropriate steps if we need to let people know that we have an issue with that. If we're transparent on why we're doing it and what it means, then there's a level of trust that we can have both ways on that.
And then, I'm also thinking about this in terms of what your message is on, different levels. So you have your message to your internal audience, you have message to your external audience, but then the external audience is a pretty big range. I mean, you're talking about clients, you're talking about, investors, you're talking about a whole range, like local, national. Like, how do you manage what your message is through all those different channels?
Sure. And it may be different messages to each one. I mean, you can't give conflicting messages out. You can't say to your stockholders, hey, everything's great, this won't have an impact on our finances, and then have a different one to the government when you're, asking for help, saying, hey, we're going down the tubes. So it has to be consistent through that. It's just, you're going to tailor your message based on what their needs are. Your shareholders are looking for, okay, we're running a safe environment. We don't have any additional exposure. There's not going to be any repercussions that could affect the safety and stability of the company. And we're also running through and managing ourselves in a financially stable manner. These are the things we're doing that are important to you on that. Dividend checks and all that aren't going to care as much from an internal message to your employees as they are to your shareholders out there. But you also have to make sure that, you're maybe to the government or someone else you're dealing with, that they're more interested in okay, our health and safety standards have improved. We've taken these 12 steps to make sure that if and when employees come back, that we're going to do it in a staggered manner, and that we're doing, triple and quadruple cleaning as they come through. And, that's what they're interested in. So, you slightly tailor it to exactly what their interests are. And if it's the same thing, then it just becomes blah, blah, blah to all of them.
We had the opportunity to ask some of our audience to give us some questions to ask you. And one of them that comes through is someone in our group. His name is Mike. I'm not going to give last names, but Mike asked, what are 3 must-dos for a company to be properly prepared to handle a crisis? So
what I almost call the 3 R's of a crisis. I mean, A, they must be prepared to take responsibility. And if a crisis comes, you've got to say, we own it. This is ours. And then you've got to express the second. And if you don't do that, if you don't acknowledge it's a crisis, if you don't acknowledge it's a problem, then you can't solve it. And then again, you'll fall into that platform where somebody's going to assign somebody the blame for it, and then you lay the risk of that. The second part of that, and again, that acknowledgement has to be swift. You can't let it linger out there for a month before, I mean, it's almost like the BP crisis, 13 years ago. I mean, it took them forever before they even acknowledged that there was a bad oil spill, and then all of a sudden, next thing you know, the whole world is seeing a camera of millions of gallons of oil being pumped out into the Gulf of Mexico. And then you have to show, responsibility for it, and then you have to show regret for it. And then even in that example that you saw, the CEO was sort of like, well, I know these people's lives, they want their lives back, but I want mine too. I was in a regatta 2 weeks ago, and now I'm not. Now I'm having to face you guys and answer questions. And so, he showed no empathy at that point in time when he was showing regret for it. So if you don't show, regret or empathy for the people that are affected, then you come across as inauthentic. And then in the end, you've got to have a resolution. You've got to show that something's going to change because of this, and that this won't happen again, or the likelihood is very little on there. So if you don't go through at least those 3 parts on there, then basically it's a moot point for you to even try to explain it.
Yeah, I mean, each one of those sounds like very crucial as part of the process, and it kind of like like leads me into our next question from Lisa, and she was wondering, what are the biggest mistakes companies make when faced with a crisis?
Sure. I mean, one of them is, do you have the right person speaking? I mean, we've dealt with CEOs before who almost end up with a belligerent encounter with the press. In those situations, they're more concerned about correcting a small, you misspelled my name last week, so you better correct that tomorrow. And they take what could be a one-day story and they turn it into a 3-week story. You misquoted me, and so by God, I want you to go back there and do it again. It's like, well, was this crisis really that big to where we needed to keep it in there, or was this something we wanted to get through, let them know we've solved it, and then moved on? So part of it is trying to, be too combative with the media sources on that. The other one I think I alluded to earlier was trying to over-explain yourself. If you're explaining, then you're losing. If you're trying to say, well, let me tell you what happened, and this is why it didn't really go this way, people don't care. All they want to know is, do you accept responsibility for it, and are you going to fix it? Not, well, the gasket we bought, BP's example, well, the gasket we bought really came from another company. Well, nobody cares. Nobody cares where it came from. Nobody cares at the end whether or not that was the part that was wrong or the pump that was wrong. All they cared was that thing was pumping millions of gallons of oil out there, and you needed to own it, and you needed to get it to stop. So those are a couple of the two biggest mistakes that they we see being made.
Yeah. So in terms of how to kind of deliver some of these messages, kind of go into another question here from Tim, and he asks, how can companies leverage social media in a crisis communication situation?
Well, certainly that can be that's a platform for them to get out their message on there. What they want to make sure that they don't do is to try to put something that's not authentic out there and then just allow them to get killed. The one thing about social media is you can put your message out there, but it doesn't mean you can control what and how it's being said. So you've got to have some strong discipline in there, especially if you're delivering a very negative message. You've got to have some strong discipline in there not to get combative and not to start trying to pick wars with people out there. There are going to be a lot of trolls out there, and so there'll be a lot of negative stuff. But you've got to be able to be consistent with your message. The other thing is, whatever information you put out there, you better make sure it's from a good, trusted source, and you be able to and back that up. So, how many times we hear people today to say, well, I saw on social media the other day that so-and-so is doing this, this, and this, or that how many different cures have we heard out there, or whether or not the pandemic is real or not real, or who caused it or not. So whatever you do and quote out there, you got to make sure your information comes from a trusted source, and not one that you trust necessarily, but one that's accepted by your stakeholders that you're talking to. And you can say, well, my family physician said that that this is not a problem. Well, we don't know your family physician, but the World Health Organization or the CDC or somebody that's trusted by others, that's where you need to make sure you're getting your information from.
When you talked about making sure that it's coming from a credible source. Okay, I feel like that's something that should be done, like all the time, right? So like what makes a difference in a crisis communication situation? Are we bringing in new people to double check our facts, or what is that process like? When we're in a situation like we are now.
In a situation like today, first of all, information is changing hour by hour, and so it's not just going to your trusted source, but repeatedly going back and making sure what you have is factually up to date and is still relevant. I can't remember what it was the other day, but maybe it was the governor of Georgia or whatever, when he came out and somebody asked him a question. He goes, well, we just now figured out that this virus could be easily transmitted. We didn't know it was contagious. And everybody's like, what do you mean? Because he wasn't going back and keeping up-to-date facts on that. And so when you're behind like that, then the timing of your information and making sure how up-to-date is as critical as the source itself.
how do you navigate like a complex situation like this where there's different levels within one particular crisis?
Sure. I mean, the main thing is you've got to have a focal point, and you have to pretty much stay on message with that. You can't let yourself be drugged down a bunch of different rabbit holes, and it's going to be easy to do when people start, well, what about this over here, and you say, look, we'll address that at this stage, or we'll have a different way in which we'll address that. But if you allow yourself to go down there, then you'll have messages, that are inconsistent strewn all over the place.
Well, you know what? I'm going to take what you just said there because I have 1,000 other questions that, like I want to ask you, but I don't want to go down those rabbit holes, so thank you for that. So to wrap this up a little bit, is there anything that, maybe our viewers should take away that maybe we didn't touch on or didn't talk about or anything that you kind of like to add to this conversation?
I mean, the main thing I would say is transparency is key. When someone comes across as authentic and that they're not hiding something, that they're being open and honest with you, at the end, what you're trying to emerge from is, do my stakeholders have more trust in me now than they did before or not? Again, we can start off in a crisis as the villain, and we can emerge as a hero if we come across the right way. And just to take a micro example of that, even though right now we can't go to restaurants, I mean, how many times have somebody gone in and had a problem with their order? Wasn't cooked right. I didn't order this. And what happens in the next 3 seconds about how the waiter or waitress deals with that can turn a restaurant crisis either into a bad crisis, or they can become a hero. If they say, well, I'm sorry, that's the way it is, or the chef says, you have to eat it, or, well, you took 2 bites, so it doesn't matter. You're going to walk away and tell 15 people how sorry that was and that you'll never go there again. And so they've been damaged. If the person turns around and says, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, we will take care of that right now, and we're going to bring you dessert with that, and we want to make sure the next time you come in, we'll, give you a drink for free. You're going to walk out saying, wow, that's a good experience, and that person was my hero on this. So that's sort of a micro part of that, but it's, that's what's really key there is did you emerge with more trust than you started off with?
Well, great. Well, David, I don't want to take too much more of your time. This was fantastic. I appreciate you kind of giving us all this information. I think it's very useful. If folks have additional questions, or maybe they just need some help or some advice, or maybe kind of do some work with you, is there contact information, or is there some way they can reach back out to you?
Sure. My email is david.campbell@channelfnewman.com. My Twitter handle is David R. Campbell. So feel free to reach out to me at any time. And, I'm really involved with the AAF efforts, so I'm sure you can find me there as well.
Again, I'd like to thank you for your time. And this was fantastic information, and stay safe.
Sure. I appreciate it very much.